We started part two of the book last time, which is called Structure of the Mind. And the first thing we discussed was knowledge, where we were discussing the inner knowledge and outer knowledge. Now, on page 92, we're going to discuss the koach, the power of silence. Okay, often something which is forgotten nowadays. You know, everyone's very busy nowadays talking and their views and getting everything out there, and anything that happens has to be broadcast, and then everyone has to see it. So, this is something which maybe is important for our generation to remind ourselves of. Silence. On page 92 at the top, the tool most needed to develop inner knowledge is silence. Since all of the inner wisdom can never be put into words, only silence can contain it. Let us strive to understand. If you remember, that inner knowledge were those things which are so essential to who you are as a person, as a human being, that they're almost innate, and they are the drivers behind a lot of the other things that we do. And they are, if you like, the things that define us as a person when we're able to express those in various different ways. And he says that silence is the key to develop that. He continues, words are finite. Right? Words only contain they are clearly defined and only contain a certain amount. Words, no matter how perfectly chosen and eloquent, are fragments of meaning. They are the bits and pieces which communication struggles to construct. One who is sensitive knows that the deeper the experience and the closer to one's core, the subject being communicated, the more difficult it is to express. We've all had that. Whether it's been for good things, at a simcha, when I thank my wife at a simcha, you always feel it's inadequate. It's just ridiculous. When in one sentence, you're going to be able to thank someone for, this is a bar mitzvah and a bas mitzvah, I'm thinking of, the last 13, 12 years of time and effort and love and warmth and care, or, lahavdil, the other end, in a hesped, and you're trying to say the right thing to eulogize a person. Is it possible to really sum up a person's life in a short paragraph or two? Of course, it's not possible. The words, simply aren't enough very often to express, especially if it's one's innermost feelings that one has about a person. The most significant things to be shared in life require no words, demand silence. Words intrude at these times and reduce the moment to a parody of its real self. There is a particular agony in most powerfully needing to share the most beautiful moments, experiences, and being unable to put them into words. The cure for that pain is to share with one who has his or her own inner awareness of such things. Then words are entirely unnecessary. Meaning, you'll often have this type of thing with a person that's gone through something before. A person who's going through a bereavement or an illness, for them to have a contact with a person who's had a similar situation, similar bereavement or a similar illness, often needs no words. It's not that they can talk about it better. It's that they get each other. They understand. We have someone who's going through, cancer, and Rabbi Herman has, been incredible speaking to them, just because he can identify in a way which is beyond words with the situation that the person is going through. So you have those things which are so critical, so important, which are so deep that it's impossible to put that into words, but to share it with one who has their own inner awareness, that makes a very big difference. He continues, there is an idea that words must lie. They can never accurately reconstruct consciousness. The Hebrew alphabet begins Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. The first letter, Aleph, indicates mystical knowledge, higher wisdom. Its numerical value is one, a clue to the supernal oneness, right? One is Hashem, one is Hashem. Yeah, it's not just a song for Seder night. Yeah, Aleph, that's what it represents in its essence. One is always Hashem. Obviously, it's Aleph also is the name, Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. God's name begins with an Aleph, and Adon, which means the master of the world, the master of the universe, right? Adon Olam, it's referring to a Hashem. So it's no coincidence because that's all one. It all begins, that's how the oneness begins, with one. Its components are a higher Yud and a lower mirrored Yud. If you can imagine the Aleph letter, you've got, let me see if should have printed one out beforehand. Let me get pen. Okay, there's your Aleph. And I've drawn it very badly, but if you see it in like a Sefer Torah, the way it's written in the Sefer Torah, then you've got a kind of higher Yud there and a lower Yud. Those are two Yuds. Okay, if you see them in the Sefer Torah, those are two. There's a line in the middle, and there's a yud on the top, and there's a yud on the bottom. So he says the following. Its components, the aleph, is a higher yud and a lower mirrored yud joined by a vav, which is that line, the letter of connection, which together comprise 26. Yud, the value of the gematria is 10, so two yuds, and then a vav is 6, 26, which is the numerical value of God's name. There are many more secrets hidden in the aleph, but the one to note here is that it is silent. Aleph is the silent letter. Right? You could often get away without putting an aleph in, you'd feel that the word would sound the same without the aleph. All-encompassing higher knowledge has no finite sound. The next three letters, the coming down into the finite, the tangible, so you're going from your aleph, your infinite, into the finite, the tangible, are Beis Gimel Dalet in sequence, which spells beged, the word for a garment, clothing, the outer clothing of the invisible core. Isn't that amazing? The Hebrew aleph base is not just, your ABC here. These are the letters God used to create the world. So if aleph is infinite wisdom, represents God, so the next three letters, they are the clothing to that. They're Beis Gimel Dalet, which is what the physical world is. It clothes the spiritual, it masks it. But amazingly, he continues, wonderfully, beged, a garment, is also the word for treachery. You would say the vowels bogad. The garments may lie, they may cover an identity instead of reveal it. That is their nature. The silent center cannot lie. The aleph is always the aleph, but its outer layers, those layers which have sound, which speak, may speak treachery. So therefore, you've got the Beis Gimel Dalet, you've got the finite world, which is covering the infinite, sometimes will reveal, but also sometimes will hide. Continues on page 93, second paragraph. That is the problem with words. The Maharal explains Moshe Rabbeinu could not speak well because of this idea. The conventional understanding is that he suffered from a speech defect and imperfection. But the opposite is true. He could not speak well because of his perfection, says the Maharal. He's on such a high level that he can't. He was holding in a world of truth where things are grasped as they are, grasped by a pure das. That inner knowledge of Moshe is so high. Things grasped, thus prophetically, essentially could never be shrunk into words. He couldn't bring the ideas that he had down into the finite world. To do so would be to reduce divine knowledge to a finite level. Then, after the miracle of the giving of the Torah at Sinai, which was exactly that, condensing the divine word somehow miraculously into the words of Torah, then after that, Moshe spoke normally. It takes a miracle for higher truth to be spoken here, to clothe essence appropriately and not to betray it. That is the secret behind the hiddenness of mystical teachings. The name for such teachings are sod, secret. The uninitiated understand that the word secret is used because this wisdom is kept secret. No one will tell you. But this is not so. The word secret is used because the wisdom cannot be told. It can never be put into words. Even when one knows the secret, it remains secret, which means that the highest level of understanding of Torah, that revelation, which we call sod, which is the mystical level, is secret, not because nobody can know it and no one's allowed to tell it to you. It's a secret because from relative to the finite world, it cannot be put into words. And therefore, it always has to remain somewhat of a secret. Always has to remain something which is above this world. I used to go to a shir of Moshe Shapiro, who's Rabbi Tatz's Rebbe, Rabbi Tatz's teacher. And he used to speak on a Thursday night for about an hour and a half. And it was the type of shir which was, it was basically sort of on the edge, I would say, of understanding. He would say things that you then had to go back and try and pull apart and understand. And it was literally what he's talking about here, where the thoughts were on such a high level that to express it in the finite, he would often try a few times. And every word was measured, by the way. There was no stutters. There was no humming and harring. There was no pausing. It was just a continuous flow of speech. But he would often explain a topic once, then he would go back and he would explain it a second time, and sometimes even a third time, each time approaching it from a different perspective, because the essential truth he was trying to portray was in the middle. It was that aleph, if you like, that inner wisdom, which cannot really be portrayed. And therefore, what you had to do was follow all of the different branches of his thinking, and then you would kind of, what they say in Yiddish, you had an Einfeld, which means it would fall in, it would drop in by itself, that profound, that deep idea that he was trying to portray. Let's continue. Page 94. Most potent illustration of the constricting effect of speech is found in the Agadic description of the process of birth. The fetus learns Torah with an angel, as we have noted previously. When the unborn child knows all of the Torah in the deepest way, begins the process of transition into this world, the angel strikes him on the mouth and he forgets all that he knew. This is strange. Why a blow on the mouth? Surely a blow on the head would be more appropriate to causing forgetfulness, right? We all know about the fact that the child, when he comes out, some people say that's why you've got a mark over there, there's a little indentation. Whether that's the reason or not, I don't know. But why a blow on the mouth? Surely a blow on the head. The inexpressibly beautiful idea being taught here, say the mystical sources, is that the blow on the mouth is the gift of speech. A blow, mystically, is always a challenge to grow, to develop a new faculty or level, and it's on the mouth because that is the organ of speech. As the child gains the nucleus of the ability to formulate finite words, he loses the clear, intimate knowledge of the higher wisdom. Meaning, what was the Malach teaching him? How did he know the whole Torah? He knew it with inner knowledge, with that highest level. And then the gift of speech also means that he, as it were, forgets that because he can no longer express that in the finite. Not just simultaneously, but because of the gift of speech. Being articulate means being able to shrink things into definite bounded form. And that's exactly the opposite of being able to expand things into their unlimited essence. And only miracle can reconnect the two. Miracle, or the work of intense silence. He continues, silence develops the deep well of the personality. This is an obligation, not a luxury. There must always be more to the personality than that which can be expressed. If you could sum up what you are in a few minutes of talking, you are just that. A few sentences from beginning to end. No matter how much is discovered or revealed, there must be infinitely more. Meaning, again, as I said, it's something that we're uncomfortable with nowadays because we're so used to filling our time. We're so used to the fact if I've got a few moments of peace, whether it's while I'm driving or it's I'm sitting on the bus or I'm waiting for something, we're so used to doing something. You have to pull out the phone and you have to listen to 3 podcasts at the same time. And then you have to quickly check your bank balance. And then when you've done all that, you'll see what's going on Instagram. And then after that, then you'll be ready to do whatever the next thing is in your life. Why? It's almost like we're afraid nowadays. I suffer from this too. It's almost like we're afraid of being with ourselves. We're afraid of thinking. You know, we don't want to. It makes us nervous to have that time. This morning, one of the girls was using her phone during davening. It was her second time. And the rule is, you use your phone once during davening, you get it back after davening. You use it a second time, you only get it back at lunchtime. I keep it till 1 o'clock. Now, I used to feel really bad because, you know, like taking their phone away, like it's really unfair, you know, punishment. I didn't come to school to do things like that. But what I've realized is that they are so appreciative. It's so funny. They come back at lunchtime and they say they had the best morning. So this guy was in a bit of a state. I said, look, you know, if you need to phone your mum or someone, tell them you're okay, you're alive, you know, and you won't have your phone till 1 o'clock, then do that, take the phone, send them a message, do what you need to do. Then I said to her, I guarantee you'll appreciate it. Come back at 1 o'clock, tell me how the morning was. She came back, lo and behold, at 1 o'clock, she said to me, can I give it into you tomorrow? Can I give it into you tomorrow? Amazing. Why? Because she discovered that there is a world out there which she's missing because she's on her phone and because she doesn't allow herself the gift of silence, the gift of connection to other people, all of these things. This is, you know, we embrace modernity. We don't live in caves, right? That's not what Judaism is about. We're not ascetics either, but be sensible, right? Just use your brain. That is important to us. Our mind is the most important faculty that we have. To develop the inner knowledge is critical. It's critical to who we are. And then you start thinking about what Shabbos is. Why is Shabbos so important? Why is Shabbos so definitive as to what it means to be a Jewish person? And you start to understand, maybe Hashem knew what he was talking about. Maybe the creator of the world and human beings, maybe he was quite sensible when he thought of this whole Shabbos idea. You know, not such a bad idea in 2026 to have. Let's see if we can end this off. There's the most moving and deep Torah illustration of this idea, page 95. When David HaMelech brings the Holy Ark to Yerushalayim, he danced in front of it in joy and ecstasy. The Pasuk described his dancing in the most expressive way. He was demonstrating his honor of Hashem by dancing in public. He approaches his home and his wife Michal, who's the daughter of Shaul, She objects. She tells him off. She accuses him having exposing himself ka'echad harekim, like an empty fellow dancing around in public. David responds sharply. He says Hashem's honor, he's not going to consider his own. He tells he would like to do even more. I will be even lighter than this, he says. The next verses indicate that because of this improper criticism, Michal had no child until the day of her death. And a closer reading indicates, in fact, she had a child on the last day of her life and died in childbirth. What's the meaning of this exchange? What was Michal's concern? What was David HaMelech's reply? What's the connection with the childbirth? What's below the surface? There's an insight into the narrative which is exquisite. David was not revealing his ankles. That wasn't the problem. He was revealing his neshama. He was revealing his soul. Dance is a powerful expression of internality. There's an idea that one can tell if a person has depth from the way he walks, all the more so from dance. David HaMelech's dancing showed such power, Michal felt. He exposed his entire neshama in the streets, which is never allowed. Page 96. There's a deep obligation to retain more depth than one reveals. Where, if all has been revealed, where's the connection to the source and the well of spirituality? We can only imagine the intensity of the scene. Michal was a great woman and felt she had seen the depth of David's neshama. His dance must have been an expression of pure spiritual fire. David's reply was unforgettable. I shall go further than this. In other words, do you think that what you saw revealed is all there is? There is far more unrevealed than what you perceived. I haven't forgotten the obligation of nurturing and building depth. You've misjudged my depth. That is how surely it was hidden. And it could be that Michal's misperception of her great husband, indescribably great she was herself, and maybe because of it, was somehow connected to her bringing forth a child with her life. That ultimate act of bringing the hidden into the revealed. Meaning when she didn't understand what David HaMelech was and the hidden part of David HaMelech, therefore she was denied midah keneged midah, that greatest act of childbirth, which is bringing the hidden into the revealed. You know, we had our first talk ahead of our Poland trip. And I'll be leading in school in 3 weeks. And one of the most powerful things on the trip, when there are no words, is singing. Because at times when the emotion is so high that it cannot be expressed, when you're standing in, you know, whether it's in a place like Auschwitz or it's in Treblinka, or it's, you know, a mass grave at that site, there's a limited amount one can express, even as an educator, there's a limited amount one can express in words. You try and you do your best to capture and to, you know, to say something which will sort of hold them or which will uplift them at the same time, which will explain to them. But at the end of the day, there's nothing more powerful than song. Just as he was saying here, the way that a person's neshama can be expressed with dance, similarly, the neshama can be expressed with song. Please God that all of us be able to work on that silence, just finding the quiet times in our life. Certainly Shabbos is a wonderful time to have, but even during the week, just trying to have those quiet times, those silence, and realizing that those times are going to build ultimately who we are inside, our inner knowledge, which is our core and our essence. Thank you.